The October morning light spilled through the kitchen window, soft and golden, but it felt colder than it should have. Beyond the glass, my 40 acres stretched out like a living photograph. Pumpkins scattered over the frosted grass, their orange skins glowing in the early sun. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the chill seep into my skin, and realized the sight didn't comfort me anymore. It used to be my favorite part of the day, watching the mist rise, hearing the quiet hum of the land waking up. But that morning, the silence felt heavy, almost accusing. At 62, I should have been at peace. The mortgage had been paid off for years. Every board and stone in this house was mine, earned through long days and longer nights. I had raised 2 boys here after their father, Daniel, died in a car accident 15 years ago. I had planted each apple tree with my own hands, mended every fence that the winter winds tore down, and endured every season this land threw at me. But peace? That seemed to have slipped away somewhere when I wasn't looking. The phone rang, slicing through my thoughts. I didn't even have to check the screen. The tight knot in my stomach already knew it was Mark, my younger son. "Morning, Mom," he said with that forced brightness that had stopped fooling me years ago. "Mark," I answered, keeping my voice even. I waited. "Listen, I wanted to follow up on our conversation from last week about the farm." There it was again. The same push we'd danced around for months, dressed in new words but meaning the same thing. He wanted me to sell. I moved away from the window, my bare feet quiet on the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself. "There's nothing to follow up on, honey," I said. "I told you." "Mom, just hear me out," he cut in, and I could hear the edge under his cheerful tone. "Sophie and I have been running the numbers, and this opportunity isn't going to wait forever. The tech market is moving fast, and if we don't secure funding now, then you'll have to find another way," I said, sharper than I meant to. I didn't soften it. We'd walked this path too many times. There was a pause, and then I heard Sophie's voice in the background, muffled but irritated. "She's stubborn, doesn't get it." Mark cleared his throat. "Mom, you're too old to understand dreams like this. The world has changed. Sitting on all that land when it could be turned into something meaningful." The words hit harder than I expected. Too old. I sank onto a kitchen stool, gripping the phone tighter. "I didn't mean," Mark began. "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You're 62. What are you really doing with 40 acres? When's the last time you planted more than that little vegetable garden?" I closed my eyes for a moment. He wasn't wrong about the farming. I had leased most of the fields to neighbors for the past 5 years. But he was wrong about everything else. "This land isn't just an investment, Mark," I said. "It's what your father would have wanted." "Dad's been gone for 15 years, he shot back. "You're living in the past." The line went quiet except for my own breathing. My mind drifted back to the day of Daniel's funeral, standing in this same kitchen surrounded by casseroles and sympathy cards, promising myself I'd keep everything he loved safe. Now my own son was asking me to dismantle it. "Sophie wants to talk to you," Mark said finally. "She thinks she can explain the business plan better than I can." "Woman to woman. I don't need anyone to explain anything to me," I replied, but his earlier words, "too old to understand dreams," had already worked their way under my skin like splinters. After I hung up, I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the table that had seen so much of our lives. This was where Mark once sat with crayons scattered in front of him, proudly showing me lopsided drawings. Where I taught him to tie his shoes. Where we planned his high school graduation party. That same table now felt like a stranger in my own home, as if it knew he wanted to sell the land it stood on. The words "too old" kept circling in my head like crows. I couldn't shake them. It wasn't just about my age, it was what he meant by it. Like my dreams didn't count anymore, like my best years were behind me. I'd given him so much, more than I ever admitted to anyone, and now he spoke to me like I was standing in the way. I thought of Sophie, her perfect posture, her sleek hair, her MBA that I had helped pay for. From the first day I met her, I knew she looked at my farmhouse like it was a museum piece. Charming but outdated. She saw my land as potential for something shinier, something with a logo and a social media campaign. She had a polite smile, but it never quite reached her eyes. My gaze landed on a photo on the mantel. My boys on the day of Mark's college graduation. David, my older son, stood with his arm around Mark. He was the steady one, the one who always called on Sundays, even after moving to Europe for work. David had never asked me for money, never questioned my choices. He was adopted, but that word stopped mattering a long time ago. He was mine in every way that counted. The contrast between them ached. David respected the life I'd built. Mark. I wasn't sure he even saw it as worth keeping. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. Hi, Linda. Mark told me about your chat. I'd love to meet this week to talk about our vision for the startup. Maybe Thursday at 2? Benson's Corner Cafe? She even added 2 heart emojis at the end, as if that would make me trust her. Sophie had never sent me a heart emoji in her life. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to reply with something sharp, something that would make it clear exactly what I thought of their plan. But another part remembered Mark as a gap-toothed 6-year-old, proudly bringing me a fistful of dandelions, telling me they were real flowers. That part of me still wanted him to understand. We can talk, I typed. Her reply came fast. Wonderful. I'll make a reservation. Can't wait. 2 more hearts. When I set the phone down, the kitchen felt colder. Outside, the sun was sliding lower in the sky, shadows stretching long over the fields. Somewhere in those shadows was the ghost of the younger me, the woman who thought giving everything to her children would guarantee their respect. She had been wrong about that. But she had been right about one thing. This land was worth fighting for. Thursday came with the kind of crisp autumn air that used to make me feel alive. Now it felt more like armor tightening around me. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my dark green blazer. I'd chosen it on purpose, professional but not desperate, confident without looking combative. It was the same blazer I had worn to Daniel's funeral 15 years ago, and somehow it felt right for today. The drive to Benson's Corner took 15 minutes through countryside that had barely changed in decades. Rolling hills, scattered farmhouses, and wide fields where the wind moved like waves. Most of the people out here were my age or older, clinging to their land despite developers sniffing around like vultures. I wondered how many of them had children trying to convince them to cash out. The cafe looked like something from a postcard. White gingerbread trim, hanging flower baskets, a painted sign swinging in the breeze. I'd only been here twice before. Once for a neighbor's retirement party and once for a short-lived church book club. It wasn't my kind of place. Overpriced coffee and inspirational quotes painted on wood. But it was exactly Sophie's kind of place. I saw her immediately through the window, sitting at a corner table where she could see the door. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight, perfect bun. She wore a cream blazer that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. When I walked in, she stood and leaned in for an air kiss that barely brushed my cheek. You look wonderful, Linda, she said. That blazer is so classic. Classic. A polite way of saying old-fashioned. I sat down, keeping my face neutral. Thank you for meeting me, I said. Mark said you wanted to talk. I thought it might be nice without the men around, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sometimes they can get intense. The waitress, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, came to take our orders. Sophie asked for something called a vanilla oat milk macchiato with lavender foam. I asked for black coffee, and the waitress almost looked disappointed. So, Sophie began, folding her hands on the table, Mark told me about your concerns regarding the startup. I completely understand. It's a big step. There's no step for me to take, I replied calmly. I'm not selling the farm. Her smile flickered for a moment, then returned. Of course. But maybe if you understood the full scope, you'd see this differently. Not selling, transforming. The waitress brought our drinks. Sophie took a picture of hers before sipping. I just wrapped my hands around my mug, letting the heat sink into my fingers. Tell me, I said. She leaned forward, her voice full of rehearsed excitement. We're developing an app called Farm Link. It connects urban consumers directly with local farmers. Think of it as the Uber of sustainable agriculture. And your farm could be the face of it, a flagship location with processing facilities, maybe a farm-to-table restaurant, even a boutique hotel. We'd preserve the farmhouse, of course, but make updates. Updates? I asked. You know, open some walls, add a modern touch. It would make a beautiful visitor center or cafe. I stared at her. She was talking about turning my kitchen, the heart of my home, into a tourist stop. What you're describing isn't transforming my farm, I said slowly. It's erasing it. Her eyes softened in a way that felt like acting. It's about legacy, Linda. Instead of just leaving your boys land, you'd be leaving them a thriving business. Her mention of your boys made me pause. Sophie hardly ever spoke about David, especially after she learned he was adopted. Has David shown any interest in this venture? I asked. She waved a hand. Oh, he's busy with his law work in Europe. But once he understands the opportunity. I cut her off. How much money are you asking for? That seemed to throw her off balance. Well, we had the property appraised at about $1.2 million. We'd need $800,000 in startup funding from you. The rest would stay as your equity stake in the company. I set my coffee down slowly. And if the app fails? It won't, she said too quickly. We have market research, investors interested. I thought about Mark's other sure-thing ventures, the organic dog treat company that folded, the beard oil subscription service that never delivered, the food truck repossessed before it sold a single sandwich. Sophie, I said carefully, I appreciate you explaining this. But my answer is no. Her smile cracked. Just think about it a few more days. Talk to a financial advisor. We've restructured this deal to give you a real stake. I see the picture just fine, I said. And I see that you and Mark have planned what to do with my property without asking if I wanted to sell. Her face tightened, her polished charm slipping. Mark is your son. He deserves better than watching his dreams die because you're sentimental about an old house. There it was. The real Sophie. No hearts, no gentle persuasion. Just the belief that what I had was wasted on me. You're right, I said standing. Mark is my son. Which is why I know the difference between supporting him and enabling him. I left her sitting there with her lavender foam and her big ideas. The drive home felt longer than it was. The closer I got to my house, the more the air seemed to shift. Heavier, but somehow clearer. I parked, sat in the car for a moment, and stared at the maple trees Daniel had planted the year David started school. Inside, the rooms felt smaller, like I was seeing them through Sophie's eyes. Old wallpaper, scuffed floors, cabinets I had painted myself years ago. My phone buzzed. Mark. How did it go with Sophie? She said you seemed upset. Upset. I muttered to myself. As if I were an over-emotional old woman instead of someone who had just been asked to give up everything she'd built. I didn't answer him. Instead, I poured a glass of Daniel's whiskey. The bottle was nearly empty. I'd been saving it for a moment that mattered. Tonight felt like that moment. As the burn slid down my throat, I thought of Daniel. How we'd sat by the fireplace dreaming about improvements to the farm, how he believed love and values would guide our boys. He'd be proud of David. He'd be heartbroken over Mark. Somewhere between those thoughts, a quiet shift happened inside me. The part of me that always felt guilty, the mother who thought she had to give up anything for her children's happiness, finally went silent. If Mark and Sophie thought I was too old and too sentimental to see through them, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. 3 days later, I was in the garden pulling the last tomatoes of the season when the phone rang again. The air smelled faintly of burning leaves from somewhere down the valley, and for a second, I was back in those autumns when the boys were little. Mark jumping into leaf piles, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. That memory made the sound of his voice harder to bear. "Mom," he said, with a softness I didn't trust. "I think we got off on the wrong foot about this whole business thing." "Did we?" I kept my tone even, brushing dirt from my hands. "Sophie feels bad about the cafe meeting," he said. "She thinks maybe she came on too strong. You know how she gets when she's excited." "No, Mark," I thought. "I know how she gets when she wants something." But I didn't say it. Instead I said, "She has some ideas." "Exactly," he said quickly. "And I was thinking maybe we could all meet. No pressure, no timeline. Just talk things through. As a family." The word family felt strange coming from him now, heavy with something that didn't feel warm at all. "What kind of conversation?" I asked. "Just exploring options. Sophie's been working on alternative proposals. Ways you could keep the house and still be involved." It sounded like salesman talk, alternative proposals, moving forward. Words meant to make surrender sound like cooperation. "When?" I asked. Tomorrow. We'll come to your house. Make it comfortable for you. Sophie can bring lunch. I hesitated. The house was my safe place, but maybe being on my own ground would make me stronger. All right, I said. Noon? He asked. Noon is fine. After I hung up, I stood there for a long time, looking out at the fields. The tomatoes in my basket were plump and red, grown in the soil I'd tended for 25 years. Tomorrow, they would sit at my kitchen table and try again to make me believe that this was worth less than their app idea. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called David. The connection crackled, but his voice came through warm. Mom, this is a nice surprise, he said. How are you? I'm fine. How's Prague treating you? It's incredible. The architecture, the history. The work's been fascinating too. But, are you okay? You sound tired. David had always been able to read me. I told him everything. The phone calls, Sophie's cafe pitch, and the new meeting they were planning. He didn't interrupt once. Mom, he said finally, this sounds like they're setting you up for something. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? Have they mentioned bringing anyone else? A lawyer? A financial advisor? Not to me, I said slowly. Because this smells like an ambush. They want you on your home turf because they think you'll be relaxed enough to sign something. The thought made my stomach twist. David, I would never. I know. But be careful. Don't sign anything. Don't even pick up a pen. After we hung up, I paced the house like it wasn't mine anymore. Every creak in the floor sounded like a warning. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I felt like I'd been running on nothing but coffee and nerves. I set the table with the good plates Daniel's mother had given us for our wedding, even though I had no idea why. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was because I wanted the house to look like mine, not theirs, when they walked in. Right at noon, their car crunched up the gravel drive. When I opened the door, Mark hugged me a little too tightly, like he was trying to play the part of the loving son. Sophie swept past him into the kitchen, carrying a big tote bag. The smell of expensive takeout drifted out as she unpacked. I brought lunch from the new organic place in town, she said. Farm to table, you'll love it. Even their lunch was part of the sales pitch. We made small talk while she plated the food, all on my good dishes. Mark complimented the house as if he hadn't grown up in it. Sophie admired the coffee mugs she'd drunk from a dozen times before, asking where I'd gotten them. It all felt rehearsed, like I was in a play and the script had already been written, just not by me. Once we sat down, Mark started in. Mom, I want to apologize for what I said about you being too old to understand dreams. That wasn't fair. It wasn't, I agreed. I was frustrated, he said, placing his hand over mine. You've always supported my dreams, even when they didn't work out. I don't want money to come between us. The gesture should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like he was trying to anchor me to the table before the pitch began. Sophie leaned in, her voice soft and careful. Linda, I realized I approached this all wrong. This isn't just about business. It's about family and legacy. We've been working on an idea we think you'll like. Instead of selling all 40 acres, what if we develop just the back 20? You'd keep the house and the front fields exactly as they are. Mark nodded quickly. You'd still own the farmhouse. We just handle the commercial side. Equal partners? I asked. Well, not exactly equal, Sophie admitted. You'd have majority ownership, but we'd run the operations. You wouldn't have to worry about any of that. I bit back a laugh. I wasn't supposed to worry about decisions on my own land. How generous. There's just one thing, Mark said, glancing at Sophie. To start the permits, we'd need you to sign some preliminary agreements. Nothing binding. Sophie was already reaching into her tote. Our lawyer prepared some simple documents. It's mostly to give us permission to start the application process. Out came a thick folder and a sleek pen that looked too expensive for anything simple. I'd like my lawyer to review these first, I said. The air shifted instantly. Sophie's smile stiffened. Of course. But the permit deadline is this week. If we miss it, we can't start in spring. Spring construction I haven't agreed to, I said flatly. Mark's voice hardened. Mom, we've bent over backward to make this work. We're offering to let you keep the house, to be part of the project. What more do you want? I wanted my son to remember this wasn't just property. It was home. And I wanted him to stop treating me like an obstacle. I want time, I said. The warmth drained from Sophie's voice. Linda, with all due respect, how much more time do you need? At some point, you have to trust us. Trust. That was the last straw. I'm asking you both to leave, I said quietly. Mark stared at me like he wasn't sure he'd heard me right. Mom, leave now. Yes, I said, my voice calm but unshakable. They moved slowly, as if hoping I'd change my mind. Sophie gathered the papers and slid them back into her bag. Mark stacked the empty lunch containers. Neither of them looked at me directly. When the door closed behind them, the house felt both empty and cleaner somehow, like they'd taken some of the heaviness with them. I poured another glass of Daniel's whiskey, even though it was barely past 1 in the afternoon. Outside, the October light was fading, shadows stretching long over the yard. I knew what I had to do. I picked up the phone and called the one person I trusted completely. David. It took 3 tries for the call to go through. When he answered, his voice was quick with concern. Mom, what's wrong? You never call this late. It's almost midnight here. They tried to corner me today, I said. Papers, pressure tactics. They wanted me to sign over rights to the property without even reading everything. There was a long silence. Then, Jesus. Are you okay? I'm angry, I said, standing at the kitchen window. The moonlight lay soft over the fields, turning everything silver. But I'm okay. I'm booking a flight, David said immediately. You don't even know what I'm asking yet. You're asking for help. That's enough. I closed my eyes, the relief washing over me so hard it made my knees feel weak. There's a flight out tomorrow evening, he said. I'll land in Chicago Thursday morning, be at the farm that afternoon. Your work, I started. Can wait. Mom, you raised me. You never made me feel like anything less than your real son. You've never asked me for anything. If you're asking now, it's serious. When we hung up, I sat in the dark living room, my glass in hand, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks, like I could breathe. Whatever Mark and Sophie had planned next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. The next day, I kept busy. I cleaned every room, baked David's favorite apple pie from the apples Daniel had planted years ago, and aired out his old room. Sophie called twice and sent 4 texts. The messages went from friendly, just checking in, to pushy, the permit deadline is Friday. We need to move forward. I ignored them all. Mark called once. Sophie says you're not answering her. What's going on? I told you both I need time to think. How much time? We have deadlines. Your deadlines aren't my problem, Mark. The pause that followed was long. Fine, he said at last. But don't come crying to us when you're sitting alone in that house, wishing you'd done something with your life instead of just existing. The words cut deep, but I didn't let it show. Goodbye, Mark, I said and hung up. The next morning, David came to breakfast in another sharp suit, this one dark blue with a silver tie. He looked every inch the lawyer ready for battle. As he spread papers across the kitchen table, he glanced up at me. How do you want to play this? I want them to know the days of underestimating me are over, I said. I want them to see that family loyalty isn't weakness, it's strength. He smiled in that quiet way Daniel used to, like he already knew the outcome. Then let's show them. By 2 o'clock, I watched from the living room window as a shiny black BMW pulled up the drive. Mark and Sophie got out, dressed like they were heading to a corporate presentation. Behind them came a man in a tailored suit carrying a leather briefcase, and a woman with a tablet who looked like she could smell interest rates from across the room. 4 against 1, I murmured. 4 against 2, David corrected, adjusting his cufflinks without hurry. The doorbell rang. I opened it to Mark's practiced smile. Mom, you look great. I think today is going to change everything for our family. I'm sure it will, I said evenly. Come in. Sophie wasted no time introducing their lawyer, Benjamin Cooper, and the bank manager, Eva. Both shook my hand like they were used to closing deals quickly. Sophie began laying out her papers across my coffee table. My coffee table, the same one that had held Christmas cookies and birthday cakes. Linda, Sophie began, I know last time didn't go as planned, but I think you'll like the revisions. Before we start, I said, you should know I've brought my own legal counsel. The room stilled. Mark's head turned sharply. You're what? My attorney, I said, keeping my voice calm. David. David stepped into the room, and for a moment, the expressions on their faces were worth everything. The confusion, the shock, the flicker of panic. David Bennett, he said smoothly, taking the seat beside me. Patterson Family Legal Counsel. Specializing in property law. The lawyer's eyes narrowed, recognizing another professional who wouldn't be easy to push around. Sophie's smile had already started to fray. This is really between us and your mother, she said. A family matter. David's smile was sharp. It is a family matter. That's why I'm here. From there, he began asking questions. Direct, precise, and impossible to dodge. How exactly would the loan be structured? Who would carry the risk? Eva from the bank admitted that my land would be collateral, and if the business failed, I'd be the one left holding the debt. David wrote that down without a word. Then he moved on to their track record. He brought up Mark's failed dog treat business, the beard oil subscription that never shipped, the food truck that was repossessed. Sophie's face froze like glass. Mark shifted in his chair, his ears turning red. And then, David said, flipping to another page, there's the issue with your chosen business name. It's already trademarked. Your application was denied last month. That made Eva start gathering her things. Mr. Cooper, I think we need to step outside. No, David said. We're going to finish this here. My mother deserves to hear the truth. David's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of someone who knew exactly how far the truth could cut. You wanted my mother to sign over development rights to her land for a business that doesn't legally exist, backed by people with a history of failure, and tied to a loan that would leave her responsible for every penny if it failed. Mark tried to jump in. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, David said, his tone like a door closing. And I'll tell you something else. You've already taken over $70,000 from her in the past 5 years to fund your failed ideas. That's money from her retirement savings, her emergency funds. You never paid her back. Sophie turned to Mark in disbelief. Clearly, she hadn't known all of it. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel in the air. I stood then, my legs steady as if the years had fallen off me. You saw a woman living alone on valuable land, and you thought you could take it. You thought because I loved my son, I'd be too weak to say no. You thought family meant I'd give up everything without a fight. But you were wrong. Mark looked like he wanted to speak, but no words came. Sophie's eyes darted to the door. Even the lawyer had started closing his briefcase. I want you all out of my house, I said. Eva was the first to move, heading quickly for the door. Cooper followed, muttering something about being in touch. Sophie hesitated for just a second, her expression caught between anger and, if I wasn't mistaken, reluctant respect. Mark was last, standing in the doorway, looking smaller than I remembered. Mom, Goodbye, Mark, I said and shut the door before he could finish. I leaned against it for a moment, feeling the silence settle in. It didn't feel empty. It felt clean. Like the house had been scrubbed free of something toxic. David was beside me in an instant, his arm around my shoulders. You did it, he said softly. We did it, I corrected. We went into the kitchen, and I cut us each a slice of apple pie. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the fields, the same fields they'd wanted to carve up and sell off. I realized then that I wasn't just keeping the land. I was keeping my life exactly where it belonged. David lifted his fork and smiled at me. So, what's next for you? Whatever I choose, I said and meant it. As we ate, I thought about everything that had happened. People assume age makes you vulnerable, that loving your children means giving in no matter what they ask. But real love means teaching them boundaries. Real strength means standing up, even to the people closest to you, when they're wrong. Because family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about respect. And I'd finally remembered that I deserved mine.